What inspired you to run this time?
hmm Well, I've been an activist for 10 years. I mostly on a volunteer basis. I grew up in New York City. I've worked since I was 13 years old, in different businesses, type of restaurants, and then in public interest. Now I'm a teacher. I'm a high school teacher. And I think I was living in Elmhurst, Queens during the pandemic, which was one of the places that was hardest hit by COVID-19. For a long time, we were the epicenter of the world. I was living a few blocks from Elmer's Hospital, right? And then literally when I would go out to walk to get fresh air, I would walk 2 blocks and you could see the trucks where they were putting the bodies of our neighbors, of our friends, of my students' families in these trucks, because they didn't have access to healthcare, right? For years, Cuomo has been closing hospitals in New York City, but also when we look at Elmhurst in particular, we're a very immigrant neighborhood. Most of the people in our neighborhood are undocumented immigrants, which means that they did not have access to unemployment. They didn't receive any of the stimulus checks. They didn't receive any type of help or aid from the government. And then we had the issue of housing before COVID, that rents and gentrification are rising all throughout New York City. And what did this cause? This caused that a lot of families were living maybe 4 or 5 people in one room. Now, when you have 4 or 5 people living in one room and nobody could take off work because they have to pay rent and they're not receiving unemployment, what happens? That one person gets infected, they can't quarantine, and they pass that to other people. So I think, and then the Black Lives Matter movement, the protests erupted, right? And then we saw how for months we were asking, the mayor, we were asking Cuomo to put a curfew so that people could stop going out to save their lives, so that, they would stop the spread of COVID-19, and they didn't. But when the protests erupted, they started the curfew, right? And I was out there in the protest and I saw how the police were literally closing train stations so protesters wouldn't be able to leave, so that there would be mass arrests. And then people would be in cells, in crowded cells, spreading COVID. So I think that the COVID-19 crisis made it very clear to me that this mayoral race, for many of us, for working class people, was of life or death. Because at every single point during COVID-19, they could have chosen to protect our lives, but they chose to protect the interests of the rich. And I can't stand for that anymore. I think that our volunteers can't stand for that anymore. And, I think this was the time for us to fight for change.
Thank you. Thank you for fighting and for sharing the story of so many people in your community and those around you. I wanted to ask just about, your choice of tools. Ultimately, this is about which tools we use to make change. You've been working for 10 years as an activist and organizer in your community. Running for office is a different thing, right? There are very few folks who can make that transition. We talked earlier about Congresswoman Cori Bush out of the St. Louis area. But even that, she's a congressional leader. You're running for an executive office. Mm-hmm. So you'd have to manage all of these mechanisms that have been creating challenge for your folks. How difficult was it to make that decision to say, I want to run for an executive office, which means that I will sometimes be in tension with the folks I've been building with for the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. So how'd you make that decision, and how are you going to manage that tension?
Yes, I think it was definitely a tough decision. As a party, it was a very tough decision to make, because we had to think about, we do a lot of grassroots organizing. We were feeding people during the pandemic. We were doing clothing drives. Anytime the police, messes with anybody in the community, we're there protecting them, they're fighting for them. And then this would kind of create a shift, but also our power, we wouldn't be able to have as much time we thought we wouldn't be able to have as much time to dedicate to the campaign, while at the same time doing our grassroots work. What we've learned is that this campaign has showed us that it was kind of like an easy transition, because we already had those connections in the community, and then we're already out in the streets every day almost, right? Like even when I was teaching, I would go teaching, and after teaching, we would do self-defense classes. our cafecito programs, which is a study group program for our community, right? So in that way, the transition was easy. But in terms of like the skill set that we needed, I think that we're all volunteers, but we all have 9 to 5, right? And that's the difference between like paid community organizers and like us, who are just completely and totally dedicated to this mission and vision of creating a New York City that works for working class people. That we have, our members have and volunteers have a ton of different skill sets that they were able to offer to the party. We had people that are already working with big companies on doing promotion and social media. We have people that are already working with big companies on doing fundraising and things of the sort. And I think a big lie is that, that you have to be rich or have to be go to Ivy League schools in order to know or to be able to advocate and lead people, working class people. And I think that that's a misconception. And what we're trying to show is that really it should be the everyday people that understand what working class and poor people go through that should be really leading government.
New York is one of the wealthiest cities in this country. Right. So it's a tale of two cities. Literally, you have these working class poor folk, but then you have Wall Street and some of the wealthiest people in the world. As a candidate primarily for working class folk, how do you speak to the needs of the financial needs? This city, the state actually sends more money to the federal government than it receives. How do you navigate that, Cathy?
Yes. Well, I think our biggest, our first point in our political platform is to tax the rich. So New York City has 99 billionaires with a collective wealth of $560 billion, and we have 350,000 millionaires. It is the richest city in the world, and the rich are literally becoming richer off the backs of working class people. If we just take a look at the MTA, right? There is no reason why the MTA's infrastructure shouldn't be funded by the rich, because the rich need us to use the MTA to go to work every day so that we can make their profit, right? So it literally, all of the profit that they are making is off our backs, right? During COVID-19, Amazon workers were unionizing. They were fighting back because they weren't being offered PPE. There wasn't contact trace testing. And all of these, there was literally reports of Amazon workers that were having to pee in plastic bottles because they weren't even allowed to use the bathroom, right?
And yet none of the unionizations worked. The one that I had the most hope for in Bessemer didn't work. They didn't unionize. Please make that make sense.
Well, I think at the end of the day, they have a very big fight, right? Amazon was or even a lot of like Instacart, they're facing people with billions of dollars that are creating campaigns, anti-union campaigns, union busting techniques. Many times they'll fire people who are trying to be union leaders, and then they don't care if they get a lawsuit, because at the end of the day, their lawsuit will be such a small fraction of what they're going to make in profits by exploiting the labor of the workers that they prefer to pay that little tiny lawsuit, But what we did see is that millionaires and billionaires became richer during the pandemic, while working class people, specifically Black and Latino people, were dying, right? We're dying so that they could continue to make their profit. And what we're saying is that it's enough, it's enough. And that's why we have to call for the taxing the rich in New York City. But yes, union campaigns. I led a union campaign when I was working in a restaurant. And while, you have small wins. We didn't create the union in that restaurant, but afterwards, some people left, and when they went to work in other restaurants where they felt like they were being exploited, they already had the experience of union organizing. And I know 2 other people that created unions in their jobs. Some became activists. So we see that little by little, working class people, as they unite more, as they keep fighting back, we do have wins. And ultimately, even Amazon trying to come to Queens, right? I was one of the lead organizers in making sure that Amazon HQ2 didn't move to Queens, because it would have gentrified our community heavily. And I think that was a result of our activism. And we showed that, a group of dedicated, united, working class people that fight for our best interests can definitely defeat a multi-billion-dollar company.
Yeah, I really appreciate the politics, the economic assessment. I want to get back to the politics because I just generally, I don't have a whole lot of rich friends, but I think they would probably prefer tax the rich to eat the rich, because that's what I thought about when you said it. But shifting to the political, I wanted to get a sense of your decision-making around this race. So people talked about this Democratic primary as having a good number of progressives, right? Maya Wiley leading the bunch. And you all decided not to engage in an endorsement of any of those proposed progressives or those who put themselves forward, but rather to reach outside of the frame, outside of the two-party system, to advance an independent agenda. I just want you to say a little bit about what you think we need as relates to kind of real democracy, and whether these two parties matter, whether they fit, whether we need more. You got Buffalo has a Working Families Party mayor now. So I just wanted to ask your thoughts about how the party system is working for the project of democracy for Black and Brown people, and what may need to be the future. How do we engage these parties, or what else do we do?
Yes, and I think that was a very big goal of our campaign. For many years, throughout the United States, we're ran by this two-party system, but we're supposed to be a democracy. In a democracy, any party can be involved in campaigning. And we saw that even throughout the process. We weren't allowed to begin petitioning. I believe it was until May 15th. And then we had like 2 weeks to petition. And we didn't find out whether we were on the ballot until like the first or second week of June, while the Democrats were petitioning in November. We weren't allowed to. When we look at right now, I want to be part of the mayoral debates, right? But they're saying that we have to have a donation threshold of $140,000. So I need to have had $140,000 donated to me. Now, as someone that's running for the working class, I either need to be rich or pander to the rich, and I choose to do neither. So throughout this entire process, we have been trying to shed light onto how undemocratic our political system is. That if you don't play into this two-party system, they're almost trying to like sidetrack you so that you don't, so that they make it the hardest possible so that you don't receive attention. And I think that was one of our goals, right? To show that there should be third parties that are allowed to run that probably can better represent the people and their needs than these two parties who are, in my opinion, two faces from the same coin, right? We even see that with Biden and Trump. While Trump was terrible and he was very open about him being terrible, we don't see, Biden doing all the things that he said that he was doing, that he was supposed to do, like closing down the concentration camps where children were being sent, that were before being called concentration camps. Now they're going back to being called jails because Biden is doing it. We don't see student loan payments being, canceled. So then we see that a lot of times people are running either Democrat and Republican, and many times it's just a different lip service, but the actions that are being
but Cathy, I don't want the hyperbole, can get too much. I don't think anybody sitting here right now, if Trump were president, could say that it would be the exact same as Biden being president. There's no way in hell you can tell me that, and there've been so many things, that infrastructure bill alone, COVID, not as many people would be getting vaccinated, and feel what you want on that. It's still a cluster F, but Trump being president cannot be the same, the different side of the coin.
That's why I started off saying he was terrible. He was terrible. But at the end of the day, the difference, it's big, but it could be even bigger. We could have a whole political system that is really based on the majority of working class people in the United States, instead of like very, very small minor changes. But the way our political system is created, it doesn't allow for us to for third partiers to engage, which I think we would have a better and bigger impact in people's lives.
I would like to get money out of politics. I think that there shouldn't be a money threshold for somebody debating. There shouldn't be a money threshold for somebody running. And corporations are not people. Sorry, they're not. And the donation levels are ridiculous. And it should not be only rich people get to run to represent. It's supposed to be for the people, by the people. I brought you on today, Cathy Rojas, because I've been hearing a lot of lip service about third parties, and nobody's really got the appetite to actually create one. So like they're out there. So
right.
If you really care about having diverse representation, then support Cathy Rojas, because for at least it will send a message and also give rise to the notion that people can represent one another. We can be represented by people who actually are in them streets, in the trenches, doing the work. But I think a lot of people just talk. So I wanted to have that conversation today. So thank you. I'm sorry, Starsky.
No, I'm appreciating it as well. I mean, I think I'm glad you kind of jumped in on the piece about Trump Biden, but I think I don't want to lose the wider point that, inclusive participatory democracy is not a binary construction. It's not just two options because we're too diverse a country to say that we're going to live into multiracial democracy with just two options. And that's where, for me, it's hats off and encouragement of folks to continue to do this work, to build out expressions that reflect their identities, their communities, and their stories. And I think you're powerfully telling that story of your community, which I want to salute.
Thank you. And just, I want to add a point about the donations and, getting money out of politics, because I think a lot of people would really, should really look at where are politicians receiving their money, right? And if we look, like Eric Adams has spent $11 million, I believe at this point it is, in his campaign. Much of that's coming from real estate developers, from police unions. So then when we look, it's like we need affordable housing in New York City. Everybody knows that. Our income is not enough to pay the amount of rent. So do you really think that a candidate who is receiving money from real estate developers is going to put the best interest of tenants instead of the best interest of real estate developers that really need gentrification in order for them to maximize their profits? He's not. And we really need to look at where are people receiving their donations from, and really take money out of it,
I couldn't agree more. All right. So November, you're on the ballot.
Yes.
In New York City. If you guys if you're in New York City, and you want to make a difference and really shock the world, go to Rojas, ROJAS, the number 4, Mayor 2021, and cast your vote for Cathy Rojas, because this woman's been doing the work.